Hello and welcome to the pod, Mike. It's been a long time since we've done that.
I know, it's really you. I can't believe it. We've Ian, we've got three co-hosts, and Andy's been there are a lot of rumors about where Andy's been, but he's back today. Hopefully, all those various situations that we've decided have kept you off the podcast the last few months have improved. It's a great show for you to come back on because we have an outstanding guest with us tonight. Someone who you actually have multiple things in common with. And I'm not even referring to your silky smooth broadcasting voice. So we're thrilled to welcome to the Gooners podcast one of the world's best sports commentators, a consistent and welcome voice for football supporters, both overseas in the UK and over here in the US for decades. Welcome to your duck-breaking appearance on the Gooners pods. I believe you are sometimes called Sir Ian Darke.
I'm not sure I can live up to that billing, but thank you very much. Nice to be with you.
Pleasure to have you. Now, we called this podcast Enlightened by Darke because, I spent hours on end trying to think of like the cheesiest, punniest kind of name, podcast name. And I'm like, I hope you don't mind that. It gets me depressed though, because everyone around me has these cool last names. I mean, Ian Darke, Andy Rhodes. I mean, you could put that in stuff. Even Owen, our co-host, Owen Young, Young in the Royal says, what do you do with Feinberg? like I'm cursed with this name. I can't get rid of it. I need to come up, come up with some sort of stage name.
I was about to say, you need a stage name.
Yeah, I mean, Mikey Fine or something, whatever it is that I need that. But
maybe yeah.
Enough about me. Let's talk about you. You've just come off a week where you've called 2 Arsenal games for BT Sports in 4 days, both against who I would imagine is our probably joint least favorite team in England. Considering who you support, I can gather who you might not support. Southampton. So we'd love to get stuck into the background, kind of find out from A to Z what's involved in those in covering Arsenal or in those games in general, and we'll do that in a little bit. But first, just want to kind of get us up to speed on your career. So it's your career in about 10 minutes if we do that. It's not really fair, but you grew up in the shadows of Fratton Park in Portsmouth, I believe.
Yeah, I did. And I first commentated there when I was about on the hospital radio channel there. I was invited. I was working alongside the fire chief. We found out at the end of the season that none of the broadcasts had been heard by any. But it was a great experience.
So it was basically it was just in the can. It didn't actually go out, but you didn't realize that while you were doing it. So it was good practice.
It was good. Never broadcast again for about another 6-7 years after that. I went into the evening newspaper business. I was doing news reporting and sports reporting, and it was only after a few years at the local radio station in Leicester, which you'll know, of course, that I started to do on-air stuff, into microphones, and it was probably another 5 years after that before I became a commentator.
Yeah, and you're clearly you've never been ashamed to admit you're Pompey till you die. You're still able to do a professional broadcast, obviously in any form, but you've never hid your affinity for Pompey, and Andy here is also Pompey till he dies. I mean, the whole liking Arsenal thing was just something you told me was just to get chicks, right?
Yes. That's very true. Very true.
But you grew up in Pompey. I mean,
it sounds like Ian and I grew up.
You had some shared.
We were. Looks like we were probably stomping the same grounds as one another at some various stages of our life. But Ian, did you play much football on the Common back in your youth days?
Yeah, I did, and it was there were stones everywhere. I remember cutting my knees. There were stones within the turf. It was right by the seafront. Very, very windy always. So we didn't play there that often. I used to play for the Francis Avenue junior school team when I was about 7 or 8 years old, with kids a lot older than me. I played around there, and I grew up in Southsea, and I've always loved the sea because of that.
So I would say 2 months ago, my nephew's 6, and was playing in one of the matches, and after the match, a couple Portsmouth scouts came up to his father and said, "Hey, we're interested to bring him over and start training." And then COVID slowed that down. But so my nephew is now going to be joining the youth ranks at Portsmouth to train with their keepers, which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's great. It's exciting for any kid to get involved. I think with a top club. I mean, here in the third tier now. Anyone who doesn't know watching this, so they're hoping to get promoted up into the Championship, the second tier in England. I've supported the club all my life, but I'm not one of those people really. You mentioned there about your Pompey till I die and all that. I do love the club, and I'm not frightened to admit that. A lot of commentators want to just say, "Oh well, I'm neutral." And I am neutral when I'm covering all the games. And I don't hate Southampton. I know a lot of Pompey fans do hate Southampton. I don't. I cover them quite regularly as well. And I can't afford to have any hatred for any clubs. I've got a kind of affection for nearly every club that I cover, actually.
Sure.
Did you kind of know what their backstory is?
So as a journalist and as a presenter on TV and a commentator, if you were handed a Portsmouth-Southampton match, would you take that? Would they offer it to you knowing your background? And do you feel like you would be neutral at that point, knowing the rivalry between the two?
Yeah, I think I would. It is weird to say. They probably wouldn't give it to me because it is reasonably well known that I do support Portsmouth. And to be honest with you, because of the gap between the clubs now, Southampton have been in the league, Pompey have been in the lower divisions for the best part of a decade now. There haven't been many meetings. There was one last season in the League Cup, which Southampton hit 4 goals at Fratton Park and won, predictably enough, really. But I do think I would honestly do a very, very neutral call if I did it, because you just leave any of your bias or affiliation at the commentary box door.
Oh, I bet. I always wondered if I could do that. I don't think I would, right? I just always feel like you would just have to, you'd always err on the side of caution. But, Mike and I have done live Arsenal watch-alongs, and I don't think there's a career for us in the actual live commentary world.
Especially if I sound like an overmodulated machine. Am I back, or do I still sound?
You sound like before. You sounded like you just hit puberty, and your voice was really deep, and there was a lot of echo when Ian and I were talking. And now I don't hear anything.
Yeah.
All right. So
So
I'm back then.
You are back. You don't sound as sexy. You were more Barry White when you left.
Well, look, you can just look at me if that's what you really are looking for. So, Ian, sorry about that. It got me a little distracted. Back to football, though. You've I want to talk about things other than football for a few minutes. You've broadcast top level boxing and athletics, or as we call it, track and field. Here in the States. And there are 2 sports outside of football, really, from the 2 years I lived in London, which were 1988 to 1990, that I'll never forget where I was when they happened. And I think you were calling them both. The first was the 1988 Olympic men's final 100-meter race, the famous Ben Johnson, Carl Lewis race. Now, were you doing that for I'm sorry?
You're older than you look, if you remember that.
Well, you're not seeing this camera angle isn't too flattering, but no, I was 15 or 16, just had moved to London 6 weeks earlier, and I remember watching that on the BBC. Now, were you doing the audio the radio or television for that?
I was in Seoul in 1988, working for BBC Radio. So I did, you're right. I did the radio commentary of that infamous race won by Ben Johnson against Carl Lewis. And of course, it became known as the dirtiest race in history because so many of the people who ran in that race, either, before or since, got drug raps.
I mean, essentially, the gold medal should have gone to Linford Christie, right? I mean, was he, or did he not even escape the issues? I forget.
Well, he got promoted to he finished in the race and got promoted to the silver medal. There was an issue with him with ginseng, and then a bit later on in his career, there were accusations as well.
Because Carl Lewis didn't come out of that scot-free either. In any way, shape, or form. So I think whoever finished 8th can claim the trophy. So there there was that, and then there was about a year and a half later the Tyson Douglas fight in Tokyo. Were you in Tokyo for that one as well? And was that radio?
Yeah, that was regarded, that fight. That was Mike Tyson against 42-1 outsider Buster Douglas, and it was regarded as such a formality that very few journalists traveled to the fight from the United States, and there were only 3 from Britain. So nearly all the boxing writers just didn't bother going to it because they thought it'd be a 1 or 2 round blowout. What happened was just sensational. With Buster Douglas produced the performance of his life. Mike Tyson was left clutching for his gum shield on the canvas, something you thought you'd never see. It was one of those iconic sports. And it all took place in an arena called the Tokyo Dome at lunchtime, so that the fight started to suit American television. So it was lunchtime on a Sunday, and the Japanese crowd sort of clapped almost like a cricket crowd. I mean, anywhere else, the fans would have been going absolutely wild, but it was a sensation, and it's certainly one of the highlights of my career to have covered that one.
I remember waking up because I was in London at that point. I woke up, I think, around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. Called. I was in my room. I didn't want my parents to know I was up, so I couldn't go check CFAX. But I called long distance to the States to the little like sports update line locally here in Washington to hear that Tyson had won, and my jaw dropped when they told me what had happened. But so amazing things. And another boxing moment. This is the last boxing, but none of us old guys can ever forget is Tyson Holyfield 2. In a few seasons ago on our podcast, we had some podcasters on who really didn't like each other, and one of them bit the other one's ear off. And I immediately thought of you.
Wow.
That didn't happen. But we were watching the American feed back in the States for that. But do you remember how you and Glenn McCrory called that moment? I mean, what a just a moment to never forget in boxing.
Yeah, but they called it the bite of the century. It was one of those moments where you were watching it unfold, and when it happened, I thought, is that real, what I just saw? Did he really bite his ear? Because before you say that and accuse a fighter of doing that on air, you almost do a double check, have an editing machine in your head. But yeah, true enough, that was what happened. And I think later on, strangely, Evander Holyfield kept that part of his ear in some kind of solution on his desk. So don't ask me why, but he did. But that again, you're sometimes when you're a commentator, you're aware that you are commentating or describing on a moment that is going to be front page news across the world, and you're trying to reach out really for the right words to capture the moment.
Yeah, well, I know that you found them, and boxing actually, another thing you have in common with Andy, it's his favorite sport, and he only acts like football because, right, you told me that you think it would get you chicks, right?
Yeah, no, I love boxing. I grew up over here in like the late 90s. HBO used to pretty much air all the fights. Remember that? So my dad and I would stay up and watch a lot of them, and and I think it kind of got a bad rap, but now we're seeing just so many great heavyweights from around the world who are coming together, and hopefully they can get some of these fights done. I know so many promoters just care about money, but, I want to see Fury fight everyone, and get everyone on the same card together because it's going to be tremendous.
Are you still, it's been a while, I think, since you've done boxing. Is that right? Or
Yeah, I don't cover it anymore because I left Sky Sports, where I was the boxing and football commentator, or one of the football commentators on Sky Sports. And after I'd left, I was somewhere where there was no boxing contract. So I'd done 20 years of doing top fights, and I'm getting a little bit older, as you'll realize. And so it's difficult to be on top of 2 sports at once, because you'd be working 24/7 if you're going to do it properly. And if you're going to cover a sport, you want to do it properly. And if you cover boxing, you've got to hang around the gyms, you've got to go to the press conferences and keep up the contacts. And that's pretty difficult to do off the kind of football schedule we're working on at the moment.
Do you find it a little bit disappointing that there's just so many big British fighters now than there were in the past? Legitimate, like actual. Well, you had Frank Bruno.
Lennox Lewis, kind of.
there's 2 or 3 British heavyweights now that could take a out in any fight, and it's just such a fun time for British boxing.
Yeah, but we had Lennox Lewis.
True.
For a long time. We had Prince Nassim Hamed, who
he was the best.
Electricity as a featherweight knockout artist. We had Barry McGuigan. I covered Ricky Hatton, Nigel Benn, Chris Eubank. So we had plenty to be going on with.
It was never a bad Ricky Hatton fight that I ever saw, but
no.
And
except for the ones that he got severely knocked out. I think Mayweather really clocked him well, and Pacquiao too.
Pacquiao, yeah, he was.
That was him going a bit
because he lay down like he was in a tomb. He was absolutely out cold, lights out, and thank goodness he was okay.
I actually have the Manny Pacquiao robe he wore into the ring for that Ricky Hatton fight.
Wow.
Like the actual robe.
You have to wear
that. That's worth something.
No, it is worth. Well, so quick story. So a friend I used to work with, her brother is the Nike ambassador for these athletes. So he makes sure they get all of their shoes, their training equipment. And she was going out to Oregon and she said, "Hey, do you want anything?" I said, "If you can grab me a Manny Pacquiao t-shirt, I would love that." So come like the next weekend, she comes back to work and she throws me a t-shirt and she goes, "Hey, I hope this fits." And it was awesome. I was like over the moon. And then like an hour later, she goes, "Oh, I forgot to give this to you." She pulled from out of her desk like this big duffel bag and it had the robe in it. And I was just like, what the hell? And she goes, "My brother said, do not sell this. It's one of a kind. Like it will come back to him. And it's like Manny gives it to me to give to a fan." And he goes, "Here it is." And it's sitting up in my closet. My wife's like, "What do we do with this?" And I'm like, "I don't know if we can frame it because it's pretty. I'll wear it on the next pod. It's pretty badass. That's really cool."
You wear that, and I'll wear my practice worn Kolasenek shorts. That's my prized possession. People used to compare me to Prince Nassim Hamed, by the way, the same body type and everything like that. So
because of your over the top introductions,
that and Andy still hangs around the gyms, even though he does a football podcast. But so back to football, you've covered the Premier League continuously since its inception, Champions League, Europa League, FA Cup, a boatload of international football, including friendlies, a lot of them for the U.S. men and women's national team. The Euros and of course 4 World Cups, including the last 3 on the trot. I know I can speak for most Yanks when I say that your call of the Landon Donovan goal against Algeria 11 years ago, if we can believe that. God, time flies. But that goal probably, if you weren't already there in America, that puts you indelibly in the minds of U.S. fans forever to the point where I believe many of them like to call you a Yank. How much do you remember? I mean, it seems like you remember your calls very well, but and we won't ask you to do it unless you really, really, really want to do it.
I couldn't recreate it because you can't. You can't. It was an adrenaline rush of the moment. It was one of those moments which gave you a license almost to go off the Richter scale at the end. And to be honest, I don't remember what I said. I mean, I've heard it obviously many times since then, but on the night when it happened, the USA are going out of the World Cup and they score in the 93rd minute, whatever it was, and suddenly go to the top of the group and they're through. And it's just an incredibly explosive moment. I say the same thing. You just hope what you said captured that moment. It was only when I got back to the hotel later that people were coming up to me from the ESPN team and saying, "Wow, great call on the goal." And the PR guy for ESPN said, the 26 local radio stations in America want to do an interview with you about your call. And I said, "I don't even know what I said. What did I say?" So they played it back to me. So
you want to know what you said?
Yeah, so it as it happened, what came out and what's been replayed a few times since is just what rushed into my head at that moment. And I did say, I said, it's funny, I'm a little bit embarrassed about it now because in the cold light of days, me screeching out, "Go, go, USA" sounds sort of ridiculously biased. But in that moment, and I always say this, commentaries are very much of the moment. If you play them again later and you know the context and you know what was going to happen anyway, it kind of doesn't make much sense. But in that moment, at that time, I think it caught it. Or I hope it did anyway.
It certainly did, and that goal was eerily reminiscent. And I'm not comparing the two, different situation, different levels, but very similar to the Anfield '89 goal in the sense that it started with a distribution, a thrown distribution from the keeper down the right side, and for a last second goal. I mean, they're very, very similar, but I know that you have a fond place in the hearts of many American soccer / football fans for that call. So if we don't move this to be more Arsenal focused at this point, we're going to lose our Arsenal podcasting license, and we don't want that. Because
you just described a famous Arsenal goal, haven't you? The Alan Smith one and the Michael Thomas one.
Oh, and we've been fortunate enough to have both of them on the podcast to talk about their, from a firsthand experience, and it's a moment in my life that I'll never forget and I'll never shut up about, which Andy hates. But but if we lose our podcasting license, it's going to be hard to get back because they only give out like 9,000 of those a week. So let's talk about Arsenal.
So Ian, Mike and I, we still don't know how it happened, but we were both given press passes this 2 summers ago to follow Arsenal on the tour. So we got to go up into the press boxes, enjoy the spread of food they give out. How would you rate the Emirates' lunch buffet or dinner buffet comparative across the Premier League?
Well, I think it's one of the top ones, to be fair. And I'm not just saying that because I'm on this podcast, because Arsene Wenger helped design the whole stadium, including, I think, the media facilities when the Emirates opened. And so they've always been a very dignified, classy, courteous club, Arsenal. And that goes really right through the club. And so when you go there, I think, that there's good room for the media to work in, and they make sure that you're pretty well fed and watered as well. It's not an extravagant banquet or anything like that, but you get a nice meal, a little dessert afterwards, and a cup of tea or coffee and some water. So, yeah, it's great. It's a very, very good stadium to work in, doing my job or working in the media. Probably about the best, but I hate to mention it on this podcast, but Tottenham's new stadium's quite good as well in that regard.
Well,
but,
you'd hope so if it was brand new.
Well looked after, but now, of course, with the empty stadiums, we have to bring our own picnic. It's a very, very different and soulless experience everywhere.
Did they have good lasagna at Tottenham?
I think we did one night. Yeah, we've had all kinds of things there. Beef bourguignon.
Oh, geez.
Maybe a bit of shepherd's pie one night. Some salmon, if you prefer it.
I heard that Chelsea on their European nights will actually cater their food specific to the club they're playing in the Champions League. So if it's like, if they're playing a team from like Romania or Bulgaria, they'll actually have that type of cuisine for the. And
what type of cuisine would that be? You dug yourself a hole.
I don't know. Romanian fish and chips.
Yeah, I don't know. You might get the odd stroganoff thrown in there, or goulash if it was a Hungarian team. Maybe that's a good idea. That's a very good idea.
So you obviously covered Arsenal.
We came here to get away from this food. Why are you doing this to us?
Well, Ian, when Mike and I were given the press pass the first time we showed up to the stadium, there was like an actual look of security concern from a lot of people as to why we were in there. And then someone realized, what did she say to us? Oh, you guys must be the podcast guys. That was her.
We're very excited to be there because there are now, of course, in media rooms, there are all kinds of people representing various organizations that I don't really know where they all come from. So don't feel bad about being in there. You guys are out there in the media, and obviously Arsenal fans are keen to watch you.
It's an act of Make-A-Wish Foundation, though. I mean, it really did. We felt like, that's a wonderful, wonderful charity, but we never thought we'd be on the receiving end.
We were hitting the hard questions, Ian, of figuring out which Arsenal players liked pineapple on their pizza and which players didn't. And I'm sorry, but that's just a thing that regular press guys won't ask.
Are they allowed pizza even? They wouldn't have been under.
Well, I think the best response was from Freddie Lynchburg, who said, "Would I have a body like this if I ate pizza?" and then just walked away from us. That was the best response.
Paraphrasing a bit, but it was pretty close. So as long as we're on the topic, we have to ask you. I mean, are you pro or against pineapple on pizza?
Oh, very much pro. I do like a Hawaiian pizza. Yeah.
Okay.
I try not to eat too much of it for health reasons, but it's one of my favorites. In fact, I'd say it is my favorite pizza is Hawaiian. Well,
you have just become our friend and viewer David Ziegler's favorite guest that we've ever had on. But we'll allow it. Your judgment. I'll have to go with your judgment. Andy and I actually part of the intro to our podcast was a picture of us standing on what beach was it? Was it Hermosa Beach or
it was Venice Beach? I think
Venice Beach, eating pineapple pizza and dealing with it for charity. We did it for charity.
I thought it was good.
That's not a bad way to raise money.
I'm not a fan of pineapple, and I actually enjoyed it. I have to say, would it be my first choice? No, but I enjoyed it.
Well, speaking of first choice, I have no idea why I made that segue, but I'm curious about the lead up in the game day experience. And now you've just come off, and I was gutted when I woke up on Saturday morning and realized that the feed that we were getting on ESPN Plus, and once again yesterday, the feed we got on NBC was not the BT Sport feed. I was looking forward to being able to talk to you about your calls and that sort of stuff. So we didn't hear it over here. But you've just come off covering the Arsenal in 2 consecutive games. You cover them a lot. Just some questions just as to what the whole thing involves, most specifically using the last couple games as an example. I mean, how much before kickoff, covering the team as often as you do, does your game prep start? Do you have access to the team before the game? Is it, a day before type of thing, or do you just show up because you know everything that there is to know already?
No, you can never know everything there is to know. There's always something you don't know. My preparation for a game would usually start 3 or 4 days beforehand. So I know what games I've got coming up. So I'll make a point of looking at those teams a bit more closely. Who's playing, what decisions the manager's been making, what formations they're using. Then I might make a few phone calls to various contacts just to find out who might be fit, who might be unfit, and then read around the subject. There's a lot to read these days on social media and on the internet, so you can find out quite a lot of things. And you might be looking for just some offbeat stories, because a lot of the players you're dealing with in the Premier League, you're talking about them a lot, and the fans are pretty familiar with them. So if you can find out something a little bit different, that's quite good. You can't always do it, but one of the things is really, whatever team you're commentating on, you've got to sound like you know as much about them as the people who follow them every week. Otherwise, you're going to be found out very, very quickly, and that because they're going to be looking at their TV and going, "Well, doesn't he even know that?" So we do our best. That's not easy because you're covering an awful lot of teams in the course of a season, and going away from Arsenal, say it's an FA Cup tie. I did Wycombe Wanderers in the FA Cup the other night. I haven't seen much of them, so that was starting with a blank page really, and a long phone call to Gareth Ainsworth, the manager, who was extremely helpful. So yeah, and then when you get there on the day, I'll have done my notes. I'll have had the Arsenal team written out, the whole squad with their squad numbers and all the little stats that I might need in any lines I might want to use in commentary about that player. And then when we actually get the starting 11, which is about 75 minutes to go, sometimes I'll get a tip off and know a little bit before that. And I will highlight the 11 players. To cut a long story short, watch the warm up just to see with my binoculars, just to refresh what everybody looks like. And then about 5 minutes to go, we're on air and go. And we hope for the best.
Bit more comfortable in the gantry in Southampton than at Port Vale?
Port Vale, yeah. Just for anyone who doesn't know, yeah, I had to commentate once from the roof of the stand at Port Vale in an absolutely torrential storm with Andy Gray. And we both ended up so very wet that we both had to drive home, not in the same car, I hasten to add. Basically, I just had to take all my clothes off, otherwise I'd have got flu.
So when they cut to you, was that embarrassing, or like for the?
Hoping a police car didn't stop me. Put it that way. Might have taken a bit of explaining.
Any special nuggets of research left over from the last two games that didn't end up going out on air? Like, for example, I heard Andy's going to say this is a conspiracy theory, but I heard that Mesut Ozil might actually be leaving the club soon. That's the big news that's going on.
There, yeah. Well, the line I loved really the other night, which I try to be sparing in use of statistics, but that is a good one. That Emil Smith-Rowe has started 17 games now for Arsenal, and they haven't lost any of them.
Really?
13 wins and 4 draws, and the record carried on.
If he's not fit for Saturday, do you start him and pull him off within 30 seconds just to keep that going?
Well, there was the one, wasn't there, where I think Gareth Bale went for his first 23 games or something like that for Tottenham, and they never won when he appeared. So they brought him on when they were 4-0 up against Burnley as a substitute one day. Thought, let's get rid of this statistic that people keep quoting, which I think he was quite grateful for. But I can't think off the top of my head. What I do think is, they did play very well in that Premier League game the other night. They look a different team to the one we were watching in the autumn, where it looked like they might never score again at times. But there were a number of good performances. Some of them from players who don't get the publicity. I think Rob Holding's come on.
Yes.
He's become an important member of the defence. Cedric, who's a squad player, has come in just recently, right back, and then filling in at left back because Kieran Tierney wasn't fit the other night. Had a great game, didn't he?
He was my man of the match.
Yeah.
He was superb.
Really was. Yeah, he was certainly. It's a good shout, and they just look a lot more energized and a lot more attacking ideas, and they're charging up the table now. So who knows where the story goes for them?
Yeah, we have to kind of ask this because it's been a very big hot button debate, amongst Arsenal supporters, especially on social media. But do you think, it's the whole, did we rotate too much in the FA Cup? Did we take it a little too lightly? Which one is more important? Because the FA Cup is a way back to Europe. It's our cup that we own, quote unquote. But, do you think in what we've seen of other games in the last couple of days and with player injuries and cramp on Tuesday night, do you think the decision looks better in hindsight to kind of over-rotate on Saturday, even though it cost us a chance to win the cup?
I think it definitely looks better in hindsight. It's obvious, though they'd never admit it publicly because managers don't. But Mikel Arteta clearly prioritised the Premier League game. I think he still believes Arsenal can make the top 4 this season, and he might well be right about that, the way things are just shaping up at the moment. So, yeah, he probably did make too many changes, and they looked worse for him, really, because Southampton picked more or less their strongest available side. They wanted the win. They picked a team that said, basically, we want to go through here. We want to have an FA Cup run, and they deserve the win in the first match.
Yet it was still an own goal deflection.
He had fresher players to bring in, the better players, and he got the win he wanted in the Premier League. So I think if you'd have said to Mikel Arteta before the 2 matches, you can win one and lose one of these 2. That's how it's going to be. Which one do you want? And he'd have definitely said, because his selection shouted it out, I want to win the Premier League one.
Well, and I think one thing that I really appreciated about Mikel Arteta since his first day is how authoritative he is in his press conferences. And after the match in the Premier League, he did come out and he didn't say, like you said, like, hey, I prioritize this, but he did say, like, these young players need to rest. I can't play them 50 matches without a proper preseason. And so he was very strict with the fact that he rested, and he knew that this was part of it. But shame on those Arsenal players who came in, because their talent should have been better in that FA Cup match. And we should not have struggled to, as we have been, and credit to the young boys, because they're coming in and they're dislodging players who have had 10 years of playing in the World Cup, Champions League finals. But shame on those players. Like, Mikel Arteta should be able to rotate, and it should be more of a competitive match.
Yeah, I'd agree with that, Ian. You think? I mean, we should still be able to beat. I mean, that was our old first team on Saturday, almost though, or Saturday or Sunday, whatever. Yeah, Saturday. That was the team that we were playing with as our first team in the fall. So.
It wasn't a weak team, but it was not the first choice players of the moment of Arteta, or not too many of them anyway. Should they have played better with the players out there? Yeah, I think they should have done, especially in the first half of the game. They showed more urgency in the last half an hour, but Southampton had more or less their full strength team out, other than Romeo and the goalkeeper, and that showed, frankly.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to make sure to get to some user questions before we let you go. First one, thank you to the real Giannis. Good to see you in the chat again. If I remember correctly, Ian has done Copa Americas and World Cup. Which one was Ian's favorite? Has he commented on any Iran games?
I think I did the Iran USA game at the World Cup, going back in time, which of course was full of all kinds of stories surrounding it. So, politically sensitive game. That was a big story. Yeah, I've covered the Copa America, and that's really fun to cover. I love covering the South American teams. I think my favorite World Cup to cover was the 2010 one in South Africa, because it was such an unusual experience, and it did contain that amazing USA game against Algeria.
Yeah, the Iran game, I think that was 1998, or no, there was that was in France, correct?
Yeah, I think
there might have been another one though.
Oh. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I think my memory is beginning to fade, but
the Copa, just such good football. I mean, such high intensity football. I've never met a Copa America that I didn't like. I mean, even though I don't watch those teams when they play friendlies, that tournament is one of my favorites.
It helps that every country down there is basically a rival to one another, so it doesn't matter who's playing who. There's some sort of rivalry every match.
So much like anger and basically
passion
on Neymar
and unless you get like the random where Japan's invited and you're like, well, this is just fun, still fun to watch, but.
And the South American fans are fantastic when you go to a World Cup. They sort of really are a huge splash of color. I remember the Colombians, the Peruvians, Brazilians always. And I remember being in a restaurant when Argentina had got to the final when we did the World Cup in Brazil, and all the Argentinian fans came into Rio. Of course, Brazil had been beaten 7-1 in the semis by Germany. So they were really reveling in it. And they were taking over the restaurants and belting out songs about how Maradona was better than Pele and so on. I mean, just as a neutral, sitting watching all of that unfold was something special.
We, my brother-in-law, he married a Argentinian woman, and they moved their family down there. But for the wedding in Buenos Aires, I think we left on a Sunday evening to come back home because the kids had to get back to school and so on. And I later found out. Well, I found out while we were there that Sunday evening was the Super Classico, and my sister-in-law's family is both River Plate on one side and Boca on the other side, and could have gotten us tickets to it if we just weren't flying out that night. That's one of the ones I miss because that matchup is insane.
Oh yeah, fantastic! I think it's. I'm told from some press guys and press friends who decided they'd go to one of those games when they were in Buenos Aires. That was a big mistake because they were kind of outed, and it was a little bit dangerous.
Yeah, I mean, this game that I missed was maybe one or two derbies before the ones where there were such violence that they had to move the game to Madrid. Yeah. Question for you from Bez. How much prep do you have to do before a game? Do you drink something to have such a great voice? I drink a lot, and I have an awful voice, so I wouldn't think that would work.
He's probably meaning like tea with honey.
Okay.
not full bottles of Merlot.
Especially, I just carry on with my life like everybody else. The prep for the games, that's kind of almost like continuous. You're never quite switched off from it, and you can never know everything. And I've stopped trying to beat myself up about that. You can't know everything about every player in every team. You hope you've got enough nice lines.
Yeah, this is a question for Andy from Yoan Young. Do you smell it? And he's referring to the Pacquiao robe.
He told me that was my friend's robe he just gave to me. Hey, Ian, I have a question for you. Is there one match in football, whether it be a World Cup final or just maybe a big rivalry that you haven't called that's on your bucket list?
Well, I've never called an old firm derby between Rangers and Celtic, which again, of course, is a pretty volcanic affair, as you'll be well aware. I wouldn't mind doing that game sometime. I've done Brazil against Argentina, Italia 90. The one you just mentioned, that'd be something, wouldn't it?
Super close.
Boca River Plate.
Yeah, that was what came to my mind when I asked that question. I was like, probably be a South American match like that. The atmosphere alone would just probably be incredible.
Next time I go down there to visit them, which will probably be this Christmas, if travel is allowed, I've got to look at the schedule because I'm hoping there's a derby. But whether there is or not, I'm gonna definitely catch a match down there.
The Mexican play at the Aztecas can be pretty lively. We had a few things thrown at us there when the USA won there. In a friendly match.
Liquids thrown at you?
Quite glad to get out of there quite quickly afterwards.
Here's David Ziegler weighing in. He may have come on too late to hear his crowning moment of your pineapple pizza adoration, but an unfair question for you. Football or boxing, which do you prefer? I mean, your career would seem to point towards football, but maybe that's not your true preference.
No, football is my preference. I played it ever since I was a little kid and played it until I was about 45 years old as well. So it's a lifelong love affair, football. Boxing I covered. I've always liked it a lot, but I kind of stumbled into it in a broadcasting way because I was at BBC Radio when the boxing commentator left to pursue a career in TV, and I was the only other guy there with a handle on it. So I kind of inherited the job. And I grew to love it, and it was a privilege and pleasure to cover those fighters and the access you get and the stories of the beyond belief, really, of some of the fighters and where they've come from and where they've gone to. So, yeah, it was all brilliant. But if you're saying football or boxing, I would say football.
Perfect. So we have two more questions, and then one final story I want you to tell, if you would. These will be quick. First, from Carl Hallberg, do you have a standout Premier League season that you remember, whether it's how it ended or the competitiveness or?
Well, the 1989 one was amazing, wasn't it? I mean, imagine that the
first division. But I when people talk about Premier League, I hate when they just cut it off when the Premier League started. Just include the first division if you will.
Yeah. Football didn't start in 1992. It's been going on many decades before. So yeah, that season. I mean, the Aguero goal that won the title for Manchester City, 2 goals in stoppage time. You can't write that stuff.
Right.
I couldn't believe that was actually happening. So I did that game for ESPN for American viewers with a very gravelly voice, Steve McManaman, that day, who had a bit of a sore throat. I think we all did by the end of it. I just couldn't believe that happened. So that was incredible as well, that season. But they all carry a kind of appeal, don't they, of their own, that they all have their own narrative. What you want is a close finish. Another one was 1995, the last day between Blackburn Rovers and Manchester United. And I was covering Blackburn lost the game at Liverpool on the last day, but were still champions because Manchester United couldn't get a winner at West Ham, and that ended 1-1. And I was doing that West Ham United game, and how Manchester United did not score in the last 10 minutes. The game was happening basically in West Ham's 6-yard box. 10 minutes. McCloskey was in goal. He made any number of just astonishing saves. So it was written in the stars that Blackburn were going to win the title. I mean, it was a fantastic bit of television. The shot of Kenny Dalglish, who was the Blackburn manager, when Liverpool scored in the last minute, and he was thinking, oh no, we've blown the title. We've blown the title. The next second he hears, we're all right. The final whistle's gone. It's 1-1. The Manchester United game. We're champions. That was just brilliant.
You mentioned Steve McManaman. I know this is not a popular theme amongst Arsenal supporters, but I loved you and Steve McManaman as a pair.
Mm-hmm.
I like the chemistry. I found him to be funny. Frankly, when I went most of the time, and I tuned out of football, when I got married, had a kid, a couple of years in university. I mean, there was too much going on in my life. So like that time frame, when I emerged from that and began watching football here in the States when it was more popularly broadcasted, it was you and Steve McManaman. And, I didn't know really who Steve McManaman was as a footballer, as it related to Arsenal. I just knew that I found him amusing, and I thought your chemistry was great. So, if you're still doing games every once in a while, I'd love to know, to get the feed for that, because you guys, had a very, very good chemistry that I enjoyed.
We still work together sometimes, not as much as we used to on BT Sport, but those were great fun days. They were going out those games at breakfast time in the United States, lunchtime kickoffs in the Premier League, and it really was very relaxed, knockabout stuff. So I mean, we do the game seriously, but around it, we'd have a bit of fun as well. I remember one day where he gave me a meat pie to eat. I know, during half time, he's eating a meat pie and passes it over to me. We're supposed to be live on air, but there was a hop from that.
It's not the first time a pie was eaten during a football match, then.
The outtakes of me and Steve McManaman during that. So some of your viewers might be reasonably amused by some of that.
Absolutely. And the final question from fellow podcaster, media magnate Mike Hers. Ian, do you know who Mike Hers is? Quick.
He does now.
It could be a yes or no answer.
I'm ashamed to say I don't, but I'm sure he's very famous.
I'm sure he is. He is now. So, Ian, if I can take 45 seconds, I heard you tell a story recently about a meeting a long way back at Sky Sports with a certain Australian guy that came in and wasn't particularly well regarded to come up with a bunch of ideas. And I loved the story. I thought it was hilarious. And if you wouldn't mind, right before we go, do you know the story I'm talking about?
I think I do. Yeah. So at the start of Sky Sports coming onto the scene as a football broadcaster in the United Kingdom, we had an Australian guy in charge called David Hill. He won't mind me telling this story, by the way, because he's absolutely a genius. He thought of television ideas you wouldn't believe of, but he wasn't, and he'd be the first to admit it, he wasn't a football fan. So he's thinking, we've landed the rights to the Premier League. How are we going to cover it? I want it to be brilliant. So we all sat there around a table one day with a game going on, with him shooting out ideas, and he was an ideas man, and he must have given us like 200 different ideas as this game's going on, all of which, or nearly all of which, were absolutely hopeless. So it's a Manchester United game, and he's going, what's happening now? And it was like a throw-in. I said, it's a throw-in, David. He said, well, put on the screen, Manchester United throw-in. No, you can't do that. You'll be laughed out of town. All his ideas were terrible. But eventually, and I'll miss out the swear words he was using in between.
You can use them if you want to.
What's the score in this game? Anybody know the score? I said, well, Manchester United are 1-0 up. Said, well, put it up on the left-hand corner. And we all looked at each other and went, that's not a bad idea, is it? Put the score in the corner of the screen. And from that day to this, every telecast of a football match has the score in the corner. That was David Hill, the man who knew nothing about football. The one good idea out of 1,000 he had about the coverage. But he was quite happy for you to tell him that the rest of them were absolute nonsense.
The moral of the story is quantity over quality. That I think is what we're getting at right there. One of your ideas will eventually hit. Yes. So, Ian, it's been a pleasure. When will we hear you again on this side of the pond? Do you have anything else coming up that we should keep our eyes open for?
It's not the most glamorous of games, but it's a big game down at the bottom that I'm doing for the worldwide Premier League Productions global feed, so I think it'll go out in the United States. West Bromwich Albion and Fulham. Maybe not everyone will want to make a date with that particular fixture, but
6-pointer.
Then I'm doing Chelsea again on, but you won't hear that would be for BT Sport in England. Chelsea against Burnley, which is Thomas Tuchel's next game in charge. I think he didn't get the greatest reviews for the first one because
this game is when he gets sacked, right? He's going to get sacked after this game, I would imagine.
As everybody wrote this morning, of course, cynically, the writers are saying, well, he's just one game nearer the sack now.
Well, I saw a funny article. It was like Roman Abramovich disappointed 2 days in, still trophyless. I was like, that's as funny as it is. It's kind of accurate too.
Yeah,
then,
it's funny because it's true.
And then another person wrote two more Chelsea managers until Christmas. That was the countdown.
Well, I want to say thank you to you, Ian, and also to Derek Ray for two things. Number one, for introducing us to you, Ian, class gentlemen both. Vouching for us. I hope you come away with this not sending him an angry email asking why he tricked you into coming on with us. And secondly, thank you to Derek for this.
Sometimes it's easier just to say the name, and it's Martin Ødegaard. 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 Ødegaard.
My edit of that actually goes on for about another 30 seconds, but
Derek is the absolute king on pronunciation. So he's a mate of mine. I often ring him and say, "How do you say that player's name?" Just to double check it with him, because as you know, he does the FIFA game, so he is red hot on that. Good man, Derek.
Absolutely,
well, Ian, you're a legend. We appreciate you coming on, and we hope you come back soon because you are top notch, and thank you so much.
Mike, Andy, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very, very much. Been really good fun.
Thank you. Cheers. And tune in tonight, guys, at 10 o'clock UK, 5 p.m. Eastern. We're doing our weekly game review show. I'll be on with Owen, Mike McDonald, and Jason Schroeder, a.k.a. Colonial Cannon, to review the Southampton win, preview United on Saturday, and probably act 10% as professionally as we've tried to act on this podcast. So tune in for that. Thank you again, Ian. See you another few months, Andy.
Yeah.
And that's it for us. Come on.